Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Chasing Dreams podcast with Charlie and Justin. We are on episode number 36, I believe.
Yes.
It's pretty crazy how that flies through. The other thing that I was talking about was, how every week when we record this, it seems to go faster and faster.
It feels like it goes faster and faster. In fact, I think the time goes longer and longer.
Yeah, for sure.
The more comfortable we get, the better it
gets. It's just very strange how we get used to recording every Saturday, but the time between our recordings seems to lessen each time. I feel like we're constantly recording episodes.
Yeah.
And we originally had that bank set when we first started. We've told our listeners about that before. When we first started recording, Justin and I thought it would be good to set a bank of, episodes, kind of as a safety net for us. And then after a while, we said, okay, it's time to release them. Let's put them out there. The reason behind the safety bank was kind of just, number one, to give us a little bit of practice, and then number two, to provide a little bit of, some backup in case we weren't able to record on a particular Sunday. But you and I dropped the ball on that, and then what we did was we just released the episodes consecutively without recording.
Yeah.
So then by the time all the episodes were released, we had no safety net or bank saved up at that point. Right. So it was useless.
Well, and now I actually get questions kind of often about, do we do these live? Because people think we're recording them live now, which essentially we not live, but
there's not a lot of editing or any editing that much.
There's no editing
place.
So much but no lag even really between the time we press record and end to dispersing it to the public.
Basically, what we do is we record, and then the only editing, and I use that term pretty liberally because it's not editing.
Put in the music.
All we do is put the music in. We use iMovie, again, low budget operation here. I put it in with iMovie, and then we're posting away. It's very simple, idiot proof. If we can do it, anybody can do it. So,
any updates?
No, not really, none.
Really, yeah.
Which is good news.
Yeah.
We say, I feel like that's a repetitive theme. Is no news is good news. If we're not updating things, that means training's going well and work is busy and hectic, but that's to be expected for both of us at this point.
Right.
But we have a very special guest with us today. This one is kind of outside of my wheelhouse, which is a good thing because we want to talk about things that we're not familiar with or that maybe we don't understand particularly well. So our guest, this is the second installment of our kind of leadership series, because first we had on Coach Williams, who is a trustee and head coach of a wrestling program, local wrestling program, one of the best in Ohio for the better half of a decade. I think he was 10 years, maybe 9 years, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. He was there for several. And that kind of was the impetus to start a little bit of a leadership seminar, if you will, where we have guests on that are familiar with different leadership skill sets. So our guest today is happily married, father of two. He works as an architect level IT engineer for a Fortune 500 company for 6 years. And then he's also involved in the fire service, which is where you come into play, because you obviously know a lot more about that than I do. Which he has half a decade of experience, FF2, hazmat tech, operations level, auto extrication, structural collapse, grain bin rescue, and rope rescue, none of which I have any idea what that means. So we will welcome onto the show Jared Churchman.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Thank you for joining us today. So I told you before we started, you have a very good podcast voice.
Oh, well, I didn't realize that until you said that, but thanks.
It's very deep, and it almost sounds it sounds like someone I know. I don't know if it's a personal, someone I know, in the community or someone famous. Have you ever been told that your voice sounds like someone famous?
No, not at all. Usually people just tell me to be quiet. So,
so before we get started on kind of the interview process and asking you questions related to leadership, I got to find out what all this stuff means. So hazmat, that's the suits and stuff, when you're dealing with dangerous, the chemicals or anything toxic, correct?
all the way up to that, but hazmat could be something as simple as what Justin and I found that one night out in the creek, where we were building, what was a heating oil?
Heating oil, yeah.
Leaking into a creek, and you do your best to, environmentally mitigate that. We built a couple of dams and had absorbent booms built. So, and it could be as simple as you can get a hazmat call just for a simple oil spill on the highway or a fuel spill, but yeah, all the way up to those fully encapsulating level A suits, which are super fun.
Okay, so I learned something on that, and then
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
When you wear those suits, are you wearing those over turnout gear?
No, not turnout gear. And depending on what you're getting into, you might have lots of layers like Tyvek suits, depending on what you're getting into. But trust me, it is hot.
I bet.
So even with a Tyvek suit and whatever you happen to be wearing when you get in there, I mean, it's really, really hot because they by design, they don't breathe at all.
Right.
And then we have operations level for auto extrication. So I'm assuming that's where you take someone out of the vehicle. Is that like the Jaws of Life stuff?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, very cool. See, I figured that one out on my own. What is next? We have structural collapse, which is where a building falls down. You got to save someone out of it, right?
Yep.
Okay, and then grain bin rescue. Is that like, I think of like a silo, like someone falls in a silo.
Exactly. And it's an oddly specific rescue discipline, but
That's exactly what was in my head
it
when I
also
saw
has
that.
oddly specific requirements to get those types of jobs done. Because you wouldn't think like, oh, a guy fell into a grain bin, let's go get him out. But what happens is you have augers at the bottom of those you have to contend with if it's all the way down there, and even if the guy's just pinned, maybe even up to his waist, the weight of that grain, the bins are designed to push that weight inward. So once you get into it, you're not getting out of it.
It's like quicksand.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's something that you have to deal with, like compression syndrome and stuff too, if they're in there for a long time.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I don't do medical.
Right.
It's a cop out. I don't do that, but you absolutely do.
Yeah.
And the basic trick of grain bin rescue is to build a coffer dam around them, either with plywood or they actually have specifically designed tube panels that you can lock together. You build that around them once you get the position of their body, and then you just start unloading grain from inside that coffer dam, take the pressure off of them, and pop them right out.
Nice.
So what limited firefighter knowledge I have, very limited, comes from just talking with you, Justin.
Which is very limited.
both casually and on air.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell the people how this whole thing came about with us interviewing Jared and where the idea started and led us to today.
It was pretty cool. When I joined the fire department, there was a lot of people wanted to help. And that's what I like about the fire services, because everybody's here for a reason. Everybody wants to help the community and do better. But there was a couple people that stood out that went above and beyond to explain things. And Jared was one of them that was always... So in trainings and stuff, they explain everything we're doing, then we execute it, and then we talk about it. But after the initial explanation, and then the more experienced guys do most of that, because they're the ones that are obviously going to be the ones actually doing it most of the time. Jared would take the time afterwards and go over what we just learned. You know what I mean? So like, I thought that was I really appreciated that, because like I'm a hands-on learner. I just hearing it doesn't work for me. So actually getting to have that one-on-one conversation and in times actually doing some of the stuff really helped me. So I figured, he's probably got a lot of knowledge. And then now that I've been here for 4 or 5 months and I've been talking to him almost on a daily basis, I definitely knew that he was somebody I wanted to get on the show.
And that kind of naturally led into a specific, an oddly specific topic of mid-level leadership.
Yeah.
Because when we interviewed Coach Williams on our last interview 2 episodes ago, episode number 34, we discussed leadership in its purest form, or at least in its most commonly thought of form, where you're in front of people. So, being a trustee, being in education, being a principal, an administrator, the head coach, where he's leading the team. So the person in front what people estimate to be at the top of whatever, paradigm they're involved in. And then we started discussing about middle-level leadership, which Jared sent us a PDF prior with a lot of notes. It was very, very maybe overwhelming for me to delve into, because it was actually really well worded, very thorough. It was probably about a 6 or 7 page PDF that he sent over about what middle level leadership is. And I'd like Jared, and we can talk about this more off air, be able to share these with people if they have any questions about it, because it's really, really something that he put together. And I think that some of our listeners, and even myself and you, Justin, could probably benefit from reading. So let's delve into that, just to talk, about the primary topic at hand, mid-level leadership. In your estimation, what does that mean to you, mid-level leadership?
Well, to understand what mid-level is, you almost have to talk about what isn't mid-level, right? So, as you mentioned, you had your guest that spoke about top-level leadership, and top-level leadership is more of the why guys, the overall overarching, seeing the big picture, taking an entire organization in one direction or the other. So they make that choice now. The people at the bottom are going to be the people in the trenches actually doing whatever needs done to get you there. But the people in the middle are going to figure out how that's going to be done. So you get from concept down to action is the people in the middle that figure out exactly how that's going to happen. And they're the ones responsible for arguably the most important part of the chain, because no matter how good your top or bottom is, if you can't get the two to meet in the middle, then you've gotten nowhere.
Right.
To provide a little bit of insights personally that would make this a little bit more relatable for me, would it be sufficient to use the analogy of a school system where principals and superintendents are the ones making the rules and kind of outlaying the framework of the school? The students are the one who actually have to abide by it and follow and learn and, get better at what they do. And then the teachers are kind of the ones that have to facilitate that as like the mid-level leaders where, hey, we know what the rules are. We know what the framework looks like in the plan. We have to help you learn it a little bit better and kind of push you on your way.
Exactly.
Cool. So see, just that analogy alone makes it very easy for me to understand. I'm like, okay, I get this now. It makes sense.
In the fire service, you have like the chief at the top, or the handful of guys that are at that level. Then you have like lieutenants and captains, and then you have just regular black hat firefighters.
Right.
Very cool.
And then, so in my thoughts on mid-level leadership is you can dive into it a little more, and like in a school setting, where you have the principal and superintendent who are in charge. They're the why guys. The teachers are the ones that make the why happen. But then you have students that excel and want to help the other students understand what the why, what the teachers are saying. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones that I think of when I think mid-level, and I understand that there's multiple layers of mid-level leadership. That was
oversimplifying. 3 tiers. You can have many sub tiers,
right.
And the best mid-level management, they have to be able to play up and play down. And the best organizations are the ones that have the divisions between those tiers more fluid. So, if you're working for me and you're out that day, I'm able to do, step down, so to speak, and do your job. And if we have a good enough employee-manager relationship that you know enough about how I do things and how I expect things to work, that if I'm away or I don't make it or whatever, you're able to step up a tier and, reasonably handle day-to-day responsibilities.
Right.
I use a lot of sports analogies because it's my way of kind of understanding things and, again, making things more relatable for myself. And I think of a couple sports analogies when you say that. Number one, when you talk about the fluidity between the different tiers, one thing that you always want within a good sports program is people being able to police themselves. So in essence, when the head coach isn't there or there's not a coach there in the weight room specifically, players are able to conduct themselves appropriately. Everybody's working hard. No one's fooling around. Likewise, at practice, if the coaches have to step off the field or off the court for a brief minute to talk about something, the players kind of continue practice. And then when you talk about the different tiers of leadership too, I think about head coach, assistant coach, and players, where sometimes it seems, at least in that regard, and I'm sure this kind of parallels into, the fire department, sports, or, business or whatever, where the mid-level leaders can actually be, I don't want to use the term more important because I'm sure that it's kind of like a food chain where every layer of that's important, but they can almost provide a little bit more of a relationship, with the people in the company or the people in the fire department, the people in the sports team, than the people at the top. When I was coaching football, there was an opportunity that arose where we had a head coaching opening. A lot of people urged me to take it. I wasn't ready mentally, and I didn't want to do it, but I almost felt a little bit pressured into it. And I ended up, applying and then taking my name out a few days later because it like dwelled on me and I continued to think about it. And one of the reasons that I, withdrew my name from consideration was because of like the relationship with the players. Whereas a head coach or somebody in charge, you obviously have good relationships with your players, but I kind of thought that that would maybe ostracize me from them a little bit because of the fact that, you know, you can't have those day-to-day discussions with them because you're kind of concerned with a little bit larger issues, where I'd like to, you know, being very close to my players, and I was always the person that I felt like they could come talk to if something was wrong personally, or they had an issue that they needed worked out, or even, you know, an issue internally with another player, or like they thought that a coach didn't like them a certain way. Those were things you could talk through. And occasionally you can do that in a non-politically correct manner, where you can say, hey, I'll be real with you. I know that you feel this way because, and you can give some objective reasoning on why they shouldn't feel that way or should feel that way or whatever. But I just feel like sometimes the leadership at the top, regardless of what entity you're in, you can lose that. And so when you're one of those middle level leaders, I feel like it affords you the opportunity to sometimes be closer to people. Do you agree with that, like in your experience here at the fire department?
Absolutely. But what makes the fire department unique is that we don't have a schedule. We don't have chief, captain, lieutenant spots filled out ahead of time. You never know who's available, who's going to show up out there. So there might be a day when we have perfectly defined top, middle, bottom guys. Everything works like you'd expect it to. There might be a day where it's me, Justin, and 2 junior firefighters on a truck. Not that it's ever happened, but it could happen. So having that fluidity between those tiers allows you to fill those roles because we don't have a choice. You know, even in a larger paid department, you know, guys take vacation. You know, you're always going to have an acting lieutenant. Those roles get filled. And keeping those things fluid, you're able to play up or play down as needed. And you talked about how, like, the head coach has just got too much going on to be that close to the players, and it is that way. I mean, especially for a football team, you know, like a basketball team is a relatively smaller population, but I mean, football teams, you know, you'll have a smaller team would have maybe 30 all the way up to you know, like 60, 70. I mean, that's a lot of people, and there's a concept called span of control, where whoever, you know, you only have so many reports, and those people only have so many reports to them, so that ratio is reasonable. So you'll have one supervisor for 4 downline workers, and then you have like 4 of those supervisors. So instead of one guy dealing with 16, you got one talking to 4, so that it's a manageable span of control. And those concepts are critical in the fire service as much as they are in business, so that you're not doing too much in a critical incident. So you're only talking to a few people who talk to a few people and then carry out the orders as such.
Which allows for less oversight.
Right, because when you're concerned with the overall direction of an organization, you have to have people in the middle that will adapt your overall picture
right
to what actually needs done. So without that layer in the middle, it's way too much to make the high-level decisions as well as the macro decisions and the nuts and bolts of how to get it done, because you simply don't have time.
Right.
And in the fire service, time is everything as far as getting things done, because the longer you wait, the worse things get for the most part.
Yeah, well, you know, in the fire service, from what I've seen, is it's super fast paced, but some steps have to be monitored. You know what I mean? You don't do everything at a sprint. It might be fast paced to the point where you look like you're moving fast, but you're being calculated.
And as you do it a little more and you make a little more calls, you will find that time kind of slows down. Mm-hmm. Like on the outside looking in, we're running around and everything's crazy, and it's funny how much time slows when you're running off of adrenaline. Like, I waited for 5 minutes for guys to get on the truck. Dude, you were there for 22 seconds.
Right. That kind of is a perfect transition into one of the only questions that I had wrote down. So how long did it take you to be able to drop everything you're doing at home or whatever you're doing and go from 0 to 100, or being asleep, or, you know what I mean, you're normal to 100?
So there were a couple of different things. The first critical incident that you end up on, and I'm not talking about, you know, the tones drop and there's a tree down, there's a cat in a tree. I mean, the first time that you have someone trapped in a car, the first time that you have a working fire, like where you know absolutely going into it that it's going to be intense. So the very first time that happens, it makes you realize, and you see the people like you had mentioned, like they're just going at it. You're like, this is crazy, and they're just going to work, even cracking jokes along the way, right?
Right.
Trying to lighten the mood. And the first time you do that, you see that happen, and you're like, oh, so this is just what's going to happen now. So like once you kind of experience it one time, you're like, you know what to expect. And then you start playing up to that, to where the second part of it is that at any point in time, I mean, being volunteers, the fire siren could go off. You know, I see Homer Simpson in that episode where he's he's holding the axe, sleeping with it.
Right.
And so you start doing little things to make sure that you're always ready, because you don't want to ever have to think that you could have gotten here quicker. And you don't want to drive unsafely. So you control the variables that you can control. Do I have my keys on me? Are my shoes by the door? You know, do I have everything I need to get out of the door? If at night I hang my pants up on my dresser, so all I have to do is jump out of bed, pull on my pants, and I'm gone.
That's funny you said that, because like when we sat down, disclaimer, we're actually at the fire station recording. I just left the gym, so when I came in, I sat down. The first thing I did was put my socks back on. And I never used to be a socks guy. Like, unless I was wearing shoes or boots, I was barefoot or in flip-flops. But now, I don't even sleep barefoot, because that's one less step I have to do when I wake up because of an emergency.
Yeah, I've done exactly the same thing. I hate sleeping in socks, but I'm always wearing them, because that's one of the slowest things when you're getting ready, is throwing socks on. And, I come from Toronto. There, it's a much smaller, denser area, and the volunteers respond to scenes directly. So I had more time, because the truck was going to get there. I went direct, so I did some of the things that I'm doing now in Glenmore, but you really got to be creative and intelligent about how you are prepared at any given moment, so that I can get here in a reasonable amount of time, catch the truck, and get out.
Right. So that kind of just moves right into I added a little add-on to that question in my head, where, so you go 0 to 100, and now you've told how you do that. But I've noticed personally how I'm struggling learning how to go 0 to 100 and do it efficiently, right? My first critical incident was a car accident with entrapment, and afterwards, I had gotten a talking to about driving too fast on the way here, which is cool. I actually really appreciated it, because it slowed me down. You know what I mean? Because it's what I needed. But like you said, you have to control the environment that you put yourself in to make yourself the most available. How do you and others even go from 0 to 100, but then be able to slow yourself down enough to be able to explain to the new guys what you need them to do to make your job better, or make themselves feel useful? Because that's what we're here for, is to be helpful and useful. And you and the other leaders around always take the time to explain what you need us to do. And I was just wondering how in your head you make that happen.
And truthfully, the time to mentor and teach is not with lights and sirens running, right? So, doing the 0 to 100 thing, and, you just look at somebody and like, I need this, I need that. It's, a lot of it's matter of fact, but you have to take the time. Like, all of the best training and mentoring, if you can't do it on the job, is going to be out around the water cooler,
right?
Or, metaphorical water cooler, right? But you have to take the time to do that, because in that moment, in that critical incident, if I've walked you around the truck and I ask you to go get a Halligan, now, Charlie probably has no idea what a Halligan is.
Nope.
Right. But if I took him out there and I showed him, hey, this is a Halligan, here's the 3 different components of a Halligan, it sits in this compartment. Now, we get a call next day, Charlie, go get a Halligan. He's going to know where that is, and he's just going to go get it. Because when you need a Halligan on the fire ground, you don't want to be like, all right, buddy, third compartment, driver's side, it's got the stabby end, it's got the forky part,
Right.
You don't have time for that.
Right, exactly.
So that's why it's valuable to do that when you have the downtime, when we have our weekly trainings or, even just after the call. Like BSing around that picnic table after the calls is one of the most valuable things that you will find in any firehouse. Every firehouse has a picnic table, and that's the most valuable time spent, even if you're just joking around but
Yeah, that's where the knowledge is spread.
absolutely. And you have a responsibility in the fire service, because that's why I do it. And that's why you saw that in me, is because I was raised in the fire service, that you had a responsibility to convey knowledge. And on the other side, you had a responsibility to learn, because you frankly cannot learn too much about a job that can kill you.
Right. Absolutely.
It's very well put. So it seems like you mentioned, some of your upbringing being in, the fire service. So leadership was probably something that you were either demonstrated to by, whomever, your family members, something you learned along the way. And Justin and I have kind of had an ongoing discussion about leadership and how it starts. We've talked about, is it innate, like something you're born with, or is it something that you can learn? And it seems like so far in our discussions amongst ourselves and with, other guests, that we've kind of concluded, at least right now, again, it's a fluid working definition that's never ending. But it seems to be that, leadership is something that you're certainly born with. Like you can have a predisposition or a certain aptitude towards it. Like you can be a natural born leader, but it's definitely also something that you can sharpen and hone as you go. Would you agree with that you were probably born to be a leader and that's something you've sharpened, or do you feel like this is completely learned from you or demonstrated from you based on your upbringing?
I've thought about that a lot, because I've listened to the episodes where you've asked that question. And it's funny, because I didn't even know that I was a leader until like 3 people within a couple of weeks told me I was. I was like, really? I was just doing what I thought I needed to do,
Right.
And I was like, well, I guess I see your point there. And I think that it's a product of your raise to a degree. I mean, it's just like everything else, it's not a false dichotomy, right? Like it's going to be an amalgam of how, obviously there are probably personality traits that you could theoretically be born with or brought up for that gives you a better position to be a good leader. But it comes down to like the zeros and ones of making decisions. I could be the most charismatic person in the world, but I wouldn't say that just being charismatic would make you a good leader if you're making terrible decisions, right?
Right.
So, it would definitely have to be components. And me personally, I think that I'm a very observational type of a learner, to the point that I absorb and retain things I never even wanted to remember. But I feel like, at least in the fire service, it's just observed from the people that kind of brought me up in the fire service. Like my metaphorical brother, Lance Winstall, is kind of the hub of my education and getting me involved in the fire department in the past 5 years. And the way that he teaches, if you walked into a room and he was teaching a class, if he wasn't standing up front, you would just think he was just another one of the guys. Because Lance knows so much. He's probably forgotten more this morning than I'll ever learn. But you would never know that about him, because he speaks to people on their level. He's just another one of the guys, and he'll be like, hey, I'm no expert, but here's what I've learned. And there's so much more value in taking that humble position, looking at somebody eye to eye and conveying that knowledge on their level, and you retain it more. Because if you look down on somebody when you're trying to teach them something, sure, they might learn it, sure, they might do what you're asking them to do, but they're going to look down on what you're trying to tell them.
It's not going to be enjoyable for them to
No,
do,
they're
to
not going to do
execute
it with
that
a smile
task
on their
later.
face. Yeah.
Sometimes there could be some false associations, I think, with leadership too, because one of the things that I've learned going forward in trying to become a better leader and working with people who are great leaders is that you have to understand your audience. So part of that is, you have a little bit of humility with everybody, but certainly with specific people. But then also being able to explain things at the level of the people you're working with. Again, I use not a lot of analogies, and one of the ones that sticks in my head is the college professor who's unfathomably well educated and knows virtually everything there is to know about a certain particular topic, but he or she has a difficult time relating that to students or and conveying that information, where they have it up here and they should expect you to know more than you do. I remember when I was in undergrad in college, I had a course that was like an intro level course to electrical engineering. It was part of my science concentration. And the professor, was an electrical engineer and expected us on day one, to be able to put together circuit boards. And some people, the best of their knowledge, this was like a prerequisite course for other courses that they had to take. Some people in the class, the most knowledge they had of anything electrical was how to turn on a light switch. So he had a very difficult time essentially dumbing things down so that we would be able to understand. So I think that's a very, very undervalued part of a good leader, would be someone who can explain things to people the way they need it explained. Whether that's, like tactile, like showing somebody, like physically, saying, okay, grab this, move this is how you do it, or verbally just explaining it, like, auditory listeners learn by hearing. There's so many different ways that you can teach things, and so many different, ways to go about that. So I think that a good leader is someone who understands that and can like play to the audience, so to speak.
Right. I agree. So I had another question that just actually kind of popped into my head because I literally could do this all day, because it's just something that I'm super interested in, right? I love leadership, and then coupled with the fire services, it's new.
Don't go full Rogan.
Right. Don't go full Rogan. What is it? How can? Because people ask me already. People are asking me what it's like to be a firefighter, and I'm like, I don't really know. Like I don't feel like I can answer that question because I haven't been around it long enough. I don't feel like it's my response. Like I have the right to explain that yet. You know what I mean? Because I'm just I'm not just a volunteer, but I'm just such a new volunteer that I don't want to sound like I've been a firefighter for 4 months, but I've been doing it for 20 years. You know what I mean? So what do you how can you describe what it feels like to help somebody at their very worst? Because let's face it, anytime that we're there, somebody's at their worst. It doesn't matter the severity on the outside, but somebody was so bad that they pressed 911.
Yeah, no matter how innocuous it seems to us,
right?
Nobody ever calls 911 on their best day. The tones don't drop at 2 a.m. because somebody got a promotion. We're going to go high five them, right?
Right, exactly.
So it's hard. It's going. I think you'll find, because you are of the mindset to where you're going to integrate this into your life. It's going to be who you are, and I think you'll be possibly disappointed to find that it just becomes part of you, and it just becomes something that you do, like brushing your teeth in the morning. The tones go off, and you go, and it's hard to keep track of that. Kind of thought that. If we're seeing somebody, if somebody calls for help, it is their worst day. It's their absolute worst day. And you have to, at the same time, to be able to, roll stress and things you see, like water off a duck's back, you have to still keep some of that vulnerable to be able to be sensitive to the people in need. That's the most difficult part, is to remember that it is their worst day.
Right.
And you'll find as more time goes on, it just becomes part of you, especially being volunteer on call 24/7. You don't clock out, it just becomes part of what you do. And it's hard to describe what it's like to go from dead asleep at 2 a.m. and then in probably less than 5-6 minutes going from dead asleep in bed to pulling a hose line off a truck and running into a burning building or something like that. Unless you have literally done it, it's hard to describe what that's like. But just like anything else, the more you do it, the more it becomes part of you and becomes second nature. And this is what we do now,
Right.
I think you can look at leadership the same way and say that the more you're exposed to situations, because we talked about that earlier on different episodes, is one of the ways that we feel to become a good leader and strengthen your leadership skill set would be to put yourself in situations where you have to be. If you're feeling uncomfortable in a particular situation, put yourself out there and expose yourself and feel vulnerable, because then you'll be stronger because of it. You'll be more inclined to doing it better the next time, and then so on and so forth, and you become better at it, and likewise you can help other people. So I'm assuming it's the same way. I mean, like you said, your first time on, probably one of the things you're never prepared for. Like, are you ever really ready to go out on a rescue call your first time? I mean, you can learn all the things you want in the classroom, I'm sure, but then when you finally get, have to hit the road and actually go out to rescue someone or people, it's a different story.
Right.
It gets real fast.
You can't simulate critical incident stress. You have to. It's something you have to do. And, psychologically, isn't any different than, you guys would know, building muscle. You have to literally rip it apart to build it back stronger. So that, it works the same psychologically.
Right.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Again, very relatable.
I had a fleeting thought, so moving on.
So going back to the leadership, you said how, when the first time you realized you were a leader, you didn't realize you were a leader. So people were telling you this and you thought, okay, maybe I'm, a bit of a position of leadership here. Do you think that there's a moral or ethical responsibility for everyone to assume at least some degree of leadership roles now that we've established that there's different levels? The group of people that you always have this discussion with is typically professional athletes, where do they have a moral or ethical obligation to conduct themselves a certain way because kids look up to them, fans look up to them, they're in the public eye all the time. And you have people that are on both sides of that. Some people think yes because of those reasons, others think no because they never assume the position of a leader. Just because LeBron James plays basketball, does that automatically make him someone who has to burden the responsibility of being a good person at all times, or is he allowed to have off days? Because you see it with athletes where they're being interviewed and they say something they shouldn't have said, or you lash out at a reporter after a tough loss. I can't even imagine losing in a championship game at that high of a level where there's millions of dollars on the line in front of millions of fans. And the first thing that happens when you come off the field or off the court or whatever is somebody asking you questions about why you sucked. So it'd be very, very difficult to deal with. And I just wanted to know if you feel now that we've established there's different levels, if kind of everybody should assume that responsibility, at least to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely, because, if you want to look at it professionally, if I'm the only guy that knows how to do my job, it's bad for the company. Like the hit by the bus theory, if I get hit by the bus, who's going to take care of this? And then the fire service, like I mentioned before, you have a responsibility to impart knowledge. You don't want to hoard knowledge because it's to your advantage for everybody else to know that.
Being in the fitness community, I see that a lot, where people, the sharing of knowledge is what makes it so great. Social media is a wonderful platform for that, where people are constantly putting out information. In fact, it's funny because some of the people that I follow very closely, like my coach Austin, he puts so much information out there for free, like in YouTube videos, question and answer videos, Instagram posts, where he does these things called whiteboard chats, where he has a dry erase board and he goes over his particular topics for a lengthy period of time and let people ask questions on them. And it's pretty crazy how much free information people give. And it's just for the sake of sharing knowledge, and you hear people, and it's usually the successful people, coincidentally enough, that are the ones saying you need to share this stuff. When you want to be successful at first, you have to do a lot of work for free, whether that's physical, actual manual work, or if it's the sharing of knowledge. One thing, again, that I'm familiar with, because I try to familiarize everything in my own world so I can understand other people's lives a little better, would be coaching or training people. Sometimes you have to train people for free or train people without pay when you first start off, because not only is it going to get your name out there, but it's also going to serve as a learning tool for you. So if I train this person, I get to learn their little body a little bit better, and I get better at training people or having people on a diet or whatever. So I think that, doing things for free and sharing of knowledge is super, super important.
Right. Extreme ownership in leadership is when you guys talked about, when you both had mentioned owning, or not owning, but everybody should have a stake in the leadership, right? That makes me think of extreme ownership. Jocko Willink's theory on leadership is extreme ownership, where me as the lowest level in the fire department and Bill as our chief is the highest level. We should all, if something goes wrong, drastically wrong, everybody should say that this is my fault. And arguably, it really actually be their fault in their mind.
And we've
because
talked
it
about
is.
that on previous episodes where Jocko specifically
Yeah.
has done TED Talks on that, where he's talked about, things in the battlefield and in war where they've gone wrong and people have died, and he's had to look his men in the eyes and say, hey, I'm going to take ownership of this. This was my fault. This was not anybody else's fault. Even when people try to extract and take that ownership away, he says, no, it's not your fault. It's my fault.
That's what makes a good leader, is when somebody, when you're subordinate leaders and you're low level and you're just subordinate in generals, just your normal boots on the ground guys and girls even, when they take responsibility for the biggest, most critical part of the issue, and that's when you have a good leader, is when everybody has an emotional stake in the success or the failure of the situation. In my opinion, that's my opinion. I mean, obviously that's not my opinion, that's Jocko's opinion, but that's something that I've subscribed to for the better part of 2 years. And I literally make it a point to read his books every 3 months.
Yeah.
Because it's I want it to be fresh in the front of my mind. So whenever I have the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody about leadership, which comes up a lot because I'm passionate about it, I can reference the things that I want to be front and center. And then I took a note here where not knowing that you are a leader, when somebody comes to you and tells you, that you have good leadership qualities, and being completely oblivious to it, that to me is key to being a good leader. Because you don't want to be a leader. The most successful and best leaders are ones that don't want it. They are doing it because that's what needs to be done, not because they want the recognition of, I am the guy in charge. Yay, charge. You know what I mean?
No, it's usually I'm in charge. So
yeah, so here we go.
Yeah, I guess it's time.
Right. To me, I think that's the most important part of leadership. And that comes low level, mid level, top level, executive level, and everything, to me.
I think we can kind of connect the dots there too when we talk about extreme ownership, because people with extreme ownership are going to get extreme respect. So when you're in charge, or even if you're not in charge, anybody, because everybody should take on that ownership like you talked about and like Jocko spoke on. Whenever you have a certain situation, where it goes awry, if you are the one who steps up and say, hey guys, this is my fault, then that's going to garner you a little bit of respect amongst your peers, which in turn, the more respect you have, the more of a leader you are, because you can know the most about leadership and you can have great ideas, but if your people that are around you, your peers, contemporaries, or people below you, people above you, regardless, the people that you're working with, if they don't respect you, then ultimately your leadership skills are going to go to waste, I think. I've seen that happen in different sports where we have particular student athletes or, wherever where people want to be good leaders and they make a conscientious effort to be a good leader. But if you don't have that respect earned first, it's going to fall on deaf ears. People aren't going to want to be pushed real hard and motivated very hard by people they don't respect.
Right.
Once you earn that respect, typically through performance, then all of a sudden they're a little bit more willing to listen to you. If I was very out of shape and I tried to get people to, do exercises and follow particular diet strategies, people probably aren't going to listen to me because I'm not walking the walk and I don't have their respect in that regard. Whereas if I look very good and people want the physique that I have, then they're more willing to listen because they say, oh, that guy knows what he's talking about. He obviously understands that he's doing it himself, so I feel a little bit more comfortable, listening to him versus someone who doesn't look like they're in shape.
Right. Well, when you said respect, I just flipped back in my notes from Jordan Williams' episode in episode 34, where I wrote down, and we didn't talk about it because we just didn't end up getting to what I wrote. But mid-thought, mid-interview, I wrote down dedication equals respect equals good leadership. Because you have to be dedicated to the craft to get respect.
I think in regards to Jared, if he was coming in, half the time and missing some of the calls because he was asleep or whatever other excuses he could make, people aren't going to find him to be a good leader.
Right.
It's because he was here all the time, and then, like you said, he was the one that took the time to sit down with you and explain things very thoroughly and get you prepared because he was always here. Accountability is huge.
Yeah,
if you're not accountable for yourself, you're not going to be able to be accountable for other people.
I agree.
So continuing on then with mid-level leadership, because I think it's just such an interesting topic, because me personally, you understand that it's there, but you never really address it. It's kind of like oxygen and nitrogen and other things in the air that you breathe. You know that they're there, but you never really think about them being there. It's just such an interesting topic, because there's so many different, like you said, there's 3 main tiers, the top, the middle, and the lower, and then you can separate into sub-tiers. Have you noticed or ever had a desire to move up the chain as far as leadership goes? And I guess that really depends on what type of, jurisdiction you're under and what kind of domain you're in. So for me with teaching, there are opportunities where I could advance in my leadership role, where I could be, a principal or a superintendent if I, got my degree in that, or my certifications or licensures in that area. But I don't feel a desire to move up, because I like the level that I'm at. I like working with students, and I don't want to spend less time in the classroom. I'd like to spend more time in the classroom. And it makes me think, like Justin, was going to say, star in your role, which is what Coach Williams is huge on, is starring in your role. So you may be happy in your role, but have you ever had a desire to go above and beyond a leadership role, and as far as the fire department or at work or whatever?
It comes a time in both, because I'm relatively in the same position professionally and with the fire service, being about 5-6 years each with my current job and being in the fire service in general. And there comes a time where you get reasonably good at the job, and it starts to become kind of day to day,
Like second nature.
Right, and then the challenges start to become normal, and you're running out of challenges, to where stuff that used to be utterly insane is now just normal. And you get to a point where I am now, both professionally and with the volunteer fire services, that there's going to be somewhere else to go, but you don't quite know where it is, right? So the natural progression of things is I eventually probably should get into management of some kind. I don't see me doing the same job I'm doing now for the next, oh God, it's 32 more years to retirement. But who's counting, right?
Right.
And similar in the fire service, at some point, I'm going to accidentally have to be a titled leader.
Right.
If we stick around a department long enough, it's bound to happen. So, I'm ready for both whenever they present themselves.
I like your acceptance and your willingness to accept the responsibility of leadership if it's presented. And
like I mentioned earlier, there's been at least 3 specific times I can recall where I was like an acting lieutenant, because Bill was there, and then I had you kind of take a look around, like, okay, so I guess it's me. You do this, you do that.
Yeah.
If we roll up and this is happening, get this tool, that sort of thing. And there wasn't even a thought about it. It was just I just looked around like, yep, senior guy, okay, let's go.
Well, and that's kind of ironic, because we had talked off air a couple times where you are the air quote unquote guy that takes them people into their first fire.
I don't know how that happens, but
you're the break-in guy.
The last 2, it's definitely been me.
So that just shows that you're trusted enough by Bill, our chief, that's going to be okay. You know what I mean? Like if there's a new guy who's freshly certified, which possibly would be me in months to come, he'll be okay with you taking that person into a burning building, putting them on a nozzle.
And in those situations, it's one of the most gratifying things that I've done so far. Is not that long ago, I was that guy going into his first fire, and I don't ever forget that. But to be the one that gets to shepherd somebody through that, it's pretty neat.
Okay, so here we go. Then just a sporadic, a spur of the moment question. What was your first fire like?
It was a mess.
Aren't they all?
Yeah, they are. But when you're not expecting the mess, I honestly don't have a lot of specific memories from it. I can only remember the feeling of just the utter chaos, and no matter how much you thought about what you thought it was going to be like, what it actually felt like. And I was almost relieved after it was over, because although it was insane, I still was able to do the job. You know, I wasn't, and you don't know, like I said, you can't simulate critical incident stress. You know, I can learn all I want, but until I got a pack on and went in to a working fire, I didn't know if I'd be able to do it. I didn't know if I would be scared or just ran out, because like until you try, you don't know.
Right.
And it's not, I mean, everybody's not capable of that. And thankfully, it didn't really bother me. And arguably, kind of an odd calm happens when you get to that mode. Because like I have generalized anxiety disorder. I manage it basically just, you know, from different thought exercises that I've able to get a hold of it through the years, and also reducing stress helps. But in the most stressful times, arguably, that anybody can ever go through, you know, running into a burning building, the calmest I've ever been. So that's just dumb luck. I didn't learn that.
Right.
It just so happens that getting into that frame of mind, like the mindset you're talking about, mindset's like, here's what's in front of me. This is crazy, you know, or like what was that Kevin Costner? It was like clear the mechanism and everything just fades away.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that gives you a little bit of some validation that you're doing what you're supposed to do when you get to that point then. So if you can get to the pinnacle of performance, or the peak performance, or at least where performance is necessary, like that highly critical situation, in whatever you do, whether it's like bodybuilding or running or, you know, firefighting, if you find that a little bit of euphoria almost, not necessarily euphoria, because I'm sure like as you're fighting a fire, you're not like enjoying it, like, oh yes, this is awesome, this person's house is burning down, their livelihood's at stake. But the fact that like you're able to find comfort, and you're almost, I don't know if this is the right word, you tell me, where you almost become a little bit desensitized to the severity, where it's like, okay, I have a job to do. It's like doctors, you know, who are performing, you know, super risky surgeries or invasive surgeries, where someone's lying on the table, you know, and they're taking their heart out and replacing it with a new one, where it's kind of like you said, to use the quote, day to day, where you begin to get used to the pressure and it kind of starts to fade away. I think that's just validation that you're doing what you're supposed to do then, because not everybody could do that.
Right.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that, like, but it's one of the most difficult things to explain to somebody who has never been in the fire service. Like, we are excited to go to a structure fire, you know, and we're excited to go and do that. Because there are physiological responses. Like, you get that hit of dopamine. You know, you train so hard and you study and you do and you just, all of it is basically centered around getting to that big job and getting it done. So yeah, we do get excited about it, and that's why I said like it's hard to keep in mind this person's losing their house. But of course, we want to do the job that we were trained to do. It's going to happen. We don't wish it on anybody, but eventually, given enough time, everything you can think of will happen.
You were the first person that could help me work through that, because I said to you early on, I keep hearing the tones drop and it's a tree down, and I get kind of like bummed out. Or our few structure fires since I've been on the department, I've been at work, and I'm sitting by looking at the text message come across my phone, and it's like my adrenaline, that dopamine, that hit of dopamine like you talk about, comes over me, and I'm sitting at work, and I'm like, oh man. Like, and then
time to go run some laps.
Right. So now I'm sitting at home and I'm in bed, and on my days off, like I do this, and I find myself doing this, and you were the only one that so far that has like said, man, it's cool, that's normal. But like on my days off, I'm like, okay, so I'm off for the next 36 hours. So hopefully, and sometime in this point, if something bad's going to happen this week, I want it to happen on this gap of time, because I want to be the one that gets to go and try to help as much as possible. So I want to never have to go to a house fire, but by God, if there's going to be a house fire in St. Clair Township, I want to go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, I want to be one of the guys that's helping, and I'm sure that's how you feel.
I don't understand.
You never want to miss it.
Right.
How could you do something and not feel that way about what you're doing? So
Right.
like, I compete against guys who hate being on stage. You know, they say they hate the diet and they hate the process.
Why are
but
you here?
their rationale is, well, if I'm, you know, going to the gym every day and I'm building muscle, you know, and I have a good physique, I almost have an obligation where I got to get on stage and I got to show it. And I disagree with that. Like, if you're not finding enjoyment out of this, then why would you do it? If you have stage fright, again, you give a disclaimer because we just talked about how beneficial it is to like put yourself in uncomfortable situations. But when it's repetitive and it's not getting any better, you can say, hey buddy, I don't think this is for you. Whereas like when I go on stage, I enjoy it and I like it. You know, I couldn't imagine going to, you know, a fire call as a firefighter and with the exception of the first couple times, like not getting any more comfortable and having anxiety and being scared every time I go. It would only take me a couple times to realize and say to myself, okay, yeah, this isn't enough for me. I can't do this because I'm not getting better at it. My anxiety isn't, you know, being mitigated at all. It's actually getting worse because now I'm stressed out looking at my phone, wondering when we're going to get on a call. And I just couldn't imagine doing anything that like, you know, I don't enjoy all the time. Yeah. Like, was there ever an instance, like, because you were brought up in it, you said, like, when you first got involved, was there ever a point where you either thought maybe this wasn't for you or you weren't sure, like, I wonder what this is going to be like when I finally get on my first fire? Like, I wonder how I'm going to react.
There's almost a lot of peer pressure, and that's not really a concept I thought about since junior high. But, like, you're scared in front of the people that you've been working with for the past couple months, like as you got started. My first fire took like a year and a half, so I was around the station for a long time before I actually caught a fire. But like, you don't want to be that guy that has been there and is so eager to do something, then get up there and fall flat on your face, or then, you know, have to admit that, you know, I can't handle this. So, and then that's why everything was so much of a relief, because like, okay, I can do the job. I've done it at least once. Now I feel much better about it. But 18 months is a long time to catch your first job.
Right.
It was getting silly. It was like a running joke. They said that, you know, I brought the best fire protection in the world to Toronto when I joined the fire department because we went so long without one. And it's a long time. So like, if it was like a month, a couple weeks, I wouldn't have had time to stew on it, but 18 months?
I mean, I've been here a month.
That's you could make 2 humans in 18 months.
Right.
And that's how long I had to wait.
I've almost made a human yet.
Right.
And haven't had one yet. Now, I've had some pretty intense calls, but no, like, structure fires. I had a question to go on that, and I forgot.
It's interesting how the conversation has kind of jumped around, but it's all kind of focused on the same point of, you know, being a good leader at least at the middle level.
Oh, that was the question.
See,
Bing.
Yeah, right. So the question I thought of was, you said being able to say this ain't for me, right? That to me is actually an indicating a leadership quality. Being able to say, wait a minute, this area isn't for me. I need to be doing this. And knowing your role. Knowing your role is the most important part of what we talked about with Jordan, is starring in your role. Right. You have to know what your role is. I say it all the time where at work, I used to say it all the time, show me my lane. I have to know where my lane is so I can stay in it. So once I find my lane, I'm going to stay in that lane.
It's good that you recognize that, because I think no matter what you're doing, you're always going to be put in a position where you may be asked to step outside of your lane, and there's different ways to go about that. So like for me, being a personal trainer, you know, amongst many things, you know, I'll have, or a coach is probably a better example, because it happens more where you have injuries. You know, I typically don't have injuries with the people I train, you know, at least acute injuries where something happens and they're hurt right away. Where some of the athletes will come to me and say, hey coach, my knee hurts. And I'll say, okay, well, what's wrong with your knee? I don't know, it hurts. Okay, well, what does it hurt? What do you do? Well, it hurts when I do everything. When I stand, when I sit. Okay, well, where does it hurt? Well, the whole knee hurts. You know, what do you think I should do? And I always tell them, well, I think that you should go see an orthopedic doctor and not a 5th grade teacher. Because I understand that I'm probably your best option at the time, but I'm never going to assume the role of something that I'm not. So like I do that like with training. You know, I'm not going to be a physical therapist and a doctor. I'm going to be a personal trainer, and if you have some type of orthopedic impairment or you're feeling a certain way, you know, I'm going to refer you to a doctor. And then even within that small microcosm of being a trainer or someone who works with people with their nutrition, if there's a question that I can't answer, you know, nutritionally speaking, I'll refer them to someone. You know, I've referred people to my coach before, or even, you know, asked my coach and said, hey, I have this client who's exhibiting this, this, and this. We think it's likely related to or predicated on this, this, and this. What do you think? So I think being able to step back, and that's part of ownership, right? Extreme ownership is not only saying what you didn't do well, but what you can't do well. And I think that that's really, really important as well when it comes to leadership, like you said.
Yeah, a lot of time with extreme ownership, it's being able to say, hey, Jared, what do I need to get off the truck for this call? I don't know yet. When I get there, I'll tell you. Because that's you saying, I have to survey the situation. This is the tool you're going to need. Once we arrive, grab this. This is your first step. As a leader, being able to say that I don't know, I will let you know as soon as I know, or let me learn about this. Mm-hmm. Let me look into it for myself, and then once I know, I will disseminate that information down the line.
Which goes back to what you said earlier, Jared, was about how never stop learning. Like a thirst for learning and a hunger for learning will ultimately make you a better leader and make you better at everything, but especially with like leading.
Absolutely.
And that's where you kind of have to find balance too with leadership. One of the things that we've discussed on previous episodes, I think it was our first one that we actually brought up the topic of leadership, was how much of it is experience-based and how much of it can you be taught, academically speaking. So I know people that go to a lot of like leadership conferences or seminars where they travel around and they do all this leadership stuff. And unfortunately, not all those people, at least observable to what I've been able to see, are good leaders. So I think that you have to balance that with experience as well. Again, doing something I'm familiar with personal training. You can read all the academia in the world and be super well versed in like sports and exercise science, but if you haven't done it and have like practical application experience, probably not going to be very good at it. So I think it would be, likewise with fighting fires. You can teach people how to do it, but you have a lot of respect from the people that you teach because you've done it before, you've been through it, for half a decade, over half a decade almost. So, it makes you feel probably a little bit more comfort, which again leads to the bigger, overreaching kind of topic here is how comfortability with something will make you a better leader, I think.
That goes back to that respect.
Right. And leadership as an academic exercise, it doesn't work for people who don't already have that innate quality of being a leader. You can send anybody to those conferences, and I think that there's my old man used to say, I'm sure he stole it from somebody else, he said the business schools have ruined this country. Because you have these people that go and they get a degree in management and then they start working as a manager. It was never intended to be that way. You cannot reasonably expect somebody who's never done a job or a similar job at a low level to be able to do anything properly. And I've had managers of the types that were just managers because they went to school to be a manager, and then they just start managing and they have no idea what you do. And no matter how many open door policies were passed around and pinned up on the door was literally shut. And if you made enough whatsits for the quarter, you never heard of them. But if you were one whatsit short, then you were sitting in that office.
Right. That's a good analogy to take to the military. I've never been in the military, but I do. It's another thing that I'm really passionate about. And from my understanding is if you get a degree in anything, you could get a degree in hospitality management at 20 years old. And at 30, you decide I'm going to enlist. But because you have a degree, you enlist as an officer, which is a leader, a manager. Which is absolutely crazy.
That doesn't sound like a good idea.
No, that's why NCOs, the non-commissioned officers are the ones that oftentimes have the most respect. And whenever there's, this is just from talking to people that I am, and really good friends of mine that have been career military men, say, there's a platoon of guys, there's an NCO, and then the general walks up. The NCO tells the platoon of guys to snap to attention by what he does, and they're watching him. They're not watching that general, they're watching the NCO because that's the guy that they have the respect for, right? The respect for the general is not earned so much as they respect the office. And that's kind of where, that's my take on like respecting in leadership.
I'm looking through these notes right now.
And
there's so much to pick apart. Like there's actually, as I'm reading some of the quotes you put in here, like there's things that I want to ask about, and it's going to be to the point where, like, again, we could go, like, to quote you, full Rogan, and talk for several hours on all of this stuff. It's really fascinating. Because again, for me personally, I never thought of mid-level leadership as being a thing. Again, it's there, but you never really pay much attention to it, because usually when you think about leadership, at least when I think about leadership, I think of top-level leadership. I think of the person in charge leading the people, whereas there's always someone that is looking to you to lead. I saw this on Twitter, and this is hopefully not a poor analogy, but I saw on Twitter, and someone posted, they said, you are someone's favorite Twitter account. Which, somebody's always looking at what you're posting. Someone's always looking at what you're doing. There's always someone who's looking up to you, whether you are cognizant of that fact or not. Like you said, Jared, when you had started thinking about this whole leadership concept, is because people were constantly coming up to you, telling you that you were a good leader, where you didn't really view yourself as such at the time. So I think that we can probably tell our listeners, without a shadow of a doubt, that it's very important to conduct yourself as a leader, because to someone you are. There's always someone that's looking up to you for leadership or guidance, or even as an exemplary model. Like, I want to do what he's doing because of the way he does it. So I think that if I show up to school every day and I'm super passionate about class and I'm teaching with enthusiasm, I'm hoping that that's contagious and the kids will want to learn, because they say, oh, you have so much energy. Likewise with training. If I go to training clients, I want to be passionate about it and show that I'm passionate about it, because if I'm excited for the day, then they're going to be excited for the day. Where it's like with anything you do is going to get mundane and monotonous to where you're kind of repetitive in nature. And if you start showing that it's repetitive, then it's going to be repetitive for everyone that's involved. So if I'm repetitive in teaching and very monotone with it, then the kids are going to be humdrum about teaching as well and sitting in class every day. So I think that enthusiasm and keeping yourself, accountable for all eyes being on you is important no matter what you do.
Right, and to reference that to the gym, like Matt, one of our lieutenants, goes to the gym with me a lot. And when we're training, sometimes, especially during mundane movements, the accessory workouts or whatever, things that we do day to day, on chest day, we always do a tricep pull down of some sort or a press down of some sort. I sometimes will get animated, where I'll hoot and holler, I'll grunt, I'll make some noises. I try to make it exciting, because this is the most exciting part of my day until the tons drop, right? So, I want it to be fun, and some people look at me like, that's not that hard, man. Why are you grunting? Well, because I'm putting everything I have into this thing.
Yep.
I'm focusing all my energy right now on this.
And you become dependent on people for that. Like in the gym, you become dependent on people for energy. So like Jared, with yourself, being in a leadership role in the fire department or at work, when you have a bad day or an off day, because everybody does, where there's always going to be a time where you have to be the follower and look to someone else to lead. When you have those off days and you're looking to someone to boost morale or, kind of lead you, so to speak, it's important to realize that that person you looked up to, you are that person for other people every day. So the day that you're having an off day and you really, really need to lean on someone for energy, there's people that need you to be that role in their life every day. There's people that come to you that always need Justin at the gym for motivation, because every time I see Justin and how much weight he lost, I get motivated, and I don't want him to come to the gym at all. So every single day that he's there, that motivates me and keeps me, engaged in my workout or whatever. So then again, continues to go back to the theme of accountability, extreme ownership, and being proud of what you do and enjoying what you do, because it's going to be contagious. Because what do they say about smiles? How smiles are contagious. Mm-hmm. Right. That's very true. It's I've noticed, especially with kids, because they're impressionable. Whenever you are in a good mood, the kids are in a good mood, and they can sense when you're in a bad mood. There's days where I'm having a bad day, and I think to myself, there's no way that I'm showing that I'm having a bad day right now. And inevitably, kids will come up to you and say, hey, Mr. D or Coach D, you're having a bad day. What's wrong? Is something wrong? Are you okay? So people can pick up on that. And that was kind of one thing that led me eventually to quit coaching football for a while, was that it was starting to get very, very grueling for me, both mentally and physically, to the point where it was almost exhausting, because I was involved in so many different things that I eventually had to get out of it, because I knew that my mood at practice and my mood in games was not what it should be. I became perpetually negative and pessimistic with everything and was constantly angry. And when we would lose, I would let it eat me alive. And I knew, okay, it's my time to get out of this because the kids are picking up on that. And I know that I'm not able to be a good leader because the kids are upset when you lose. Obviously, no one enjoys losing. So who's going to be the person to pick them up? If not me. If it's not me, it's not going to be anybody because the whole team is upset. And then when I couldn't fulfill that leadership role, I knew it was kind of time to step away. So I think that when we talked about earlier how you can get into something and early on know it's not for you, but I think that that can be long-term too, because there's always going to be a time, even if you're involved in something. I mean, people have been married for 40 years and get a divorce. Right. So I think that if you're involved in something long enough, there can always be a point where you say, okay, time to step away.
Right. And the world that we live in is so dynamic. It's almost hyper-dynamic now. It used to be a steady line, and then there were times in history where things have just gone completely exponential off the charts. 50 years ago, 100 years ago, explain to something. 5 years ago, you try to go back in time and explain what's about to happen, nobody would believe you or understand it or have the capacity to. So things evolve so much, and I think another critical component of leadership is the ability to change. You have to be abreast to or beyond what the world is changing. It's not even worth establishing a platform and having thoughts. You need, whatever it is, whatever topic it is, whatever you guys end up sitting down and talking about, you have to just look at it for what it is today. How do I feel today? Because 17 billion things are going to happen between today and tomorrow, and things are going to change. And culturally, it's difficult because people are being held responsible for things they said 20, 25 years ago, 10 years ago. I'm a completely different person now than I was 3 months ago.
I was like, dude, if you held me to the fire for things I said when I was 15, 20, oh my.
Right. If you held me to things that I've said at 28, 29,
right.
Now that I'm 30, because, and not necessarily culturally irresponsible stuff that I've said, because I try to stay away from that. But for me, it would be more of my thoughts on political ideas changing, and because people dig up stuff, and I think we've talked about that before, where people dig up stuff that these politicians have said 10, 15 years ago, and they say, oh, they flip flop. Well, I would hope that over 10 to 15 years, especially in the world being, as you put it, dynamic, that you wouldn't remain constant on anything. If you were that constantly convicted with every little issue, I think that would probably be an issue in and of itself.
More of a problem than being dynamic instead of just picking my team color and rooting for that for 80 years in the same office.
Right.
But that's a whole other podcast.
Because you go back and forth with that stuff. At least I do with anything political or social, that I feel one way, and then I'm like, well, but I don't know, and I feel this way. And I'm one person who's, and this sounds like a paradox, but when you put it in context, it makes sense. I'm very convicted in what I believe in, but I'm also very open and fluid when I talk with people. So I want to seek out people, and we talked about it last episode, who believe the opposite that I do, because that's going to help me learn and understand things a little bit better. So in the gym, if I train a certain way, and these are the methodologies of training that I subscribe to, and I think that this is how every person who wants to gain muscle and lose fat should train, I'm going to seek out someone who believes the exact opposite, because that's going to let me learn, and then inevitably your middle ground or wherever you're at is going to shift a little bit. You're going to move the goalpost towards them slightly, or away from them, or whatever direction you want.
Somebody's going to move their goalpost.
Yeah. In an intelligent discussion, because sometimes you have discussions where no one is going to budge, and that happens all the time, unfortunately.
I usually do it by asking questions. Both left and right, up and down. People always seem to like to subscribe to their camp and fly their team colors, but it's like, we do this. I'm like, okay, so what do you think that this might be? What do you think about this, or do you think that this makes sense? And then there's just crickets. They can't answer any questions about the position that they are trying to convey because they've just gone team red or team blue. So it's I just ask questions. And if somebody actually starts answering the questions, then I'll get somewhere. But if I start asking questions and I don't get any answers, I'm like, well, okay.
One of the most frustrating things that you hear is, this is the way we've always done it.
Oh.
Because Justin and I spoke about this off air, and we wanted to talk about it on our last episode because it fit right in perfectly, and we never did. And they talked about, this experiment where they have monkeys in a containment, and a ladder and bananas at the top of the ladder. So a monkey would climb the ladder to get to the bananas, and they would turn on sprayers or jets or something and spray all the monkeys and douse them in water pretty aggressively. So then all the monkeys would stop. Well, then they would do that a couple times, and each time they would do it, they would replace monkeys. And eventually they got to the point where the monkeys were starting to beat the crap out of whatever monkey was climbing up the ladder. So if a monkey went for the bananas, the other monkeys were grabbing him off and beating him up, basically to say, hey, dude, don't go up there. It got to the point where all new monkeys were replaced. So the ones, because like I said, every time this would happen, they would place a new monkey. And it got to the point where there were no monkeys that had ever seen the jets being sprayed. So every time a monkey went up, you had a whole new contingency of monkeys grabbing them and saying no, which is a metaphor for, we don't know why we're doing this, but everybody's always done it this way, so we're just going to continue it. So they had the monkeys eventually became all new people that had never seen anybody get sprayed, because they only got sprayed the first couple times, and then they would insert a new monkey and take one out. And so you have a whole new demographic of monkeys that have never seen anybody get sprayed, but they're terrified of something that's not even there in their mind. But hey, this is the way we've always done it, so we're going to continue to do it this way.
Right. You
see it in school systems, you see it, in sports programs. I'm sure you see it in the fire department, in business, and everywhere. Saying this is the way we've always done things is a horrible mentality to take.
It's the most dangerous concept that anybody or any organization can ever face. Because the world is so dynamic, there is not a single thing that you can point to that has not changed in the past quarter, in the past 2 quarters with the pandemic. There isn't a single thing that's remained the same. No. Everything's been affected by that.
Right.
And that's just this past year. Go back 5-10 years, everything changes so fast.
Right.
And to have the audacity to think that something's going to stay the same just because it was the same yesterday is you can't play that game living in this world.
It's blind.
Yeah, and it's silly. And it's very dangerous because, like in the fire service, one thing you can look at is home construction.
Yeah.
Doing things the way that they did it back in the day with giant handlebar mustaches and rubber boots. You can't play that game on newer construction because the materials are lightweight, they burn faster, they fail quicker. You used to have something like, I think NIST studies said something like 35-40 minutes or so for 1960s type construction, actual true 2x4 construction with actual trusses, natural materials, no plastics in the living rooms. A fire would just sit there and burn for 45 minutes before it becomes a problem for somebody to survive it. Now it's something like 4 minutes. From ignition to fully involved room to all of the nasty black plastic burning smoke with hydrogen cyanide everywhere, less than 4 minutes. So if we are fighting these artificial materials, lightweight construction fires the same way that we fought fires back in the day, we'd be killing people left and right.
Right. Firefighters and
you going through roofs and going through ceilings, and you're going into a fire and you're not going to think it's that hot, and you're not applying. That's a pretty obvious example, and it's nobody in their right mind is going to look at a brand new build and say, let's go vent that roof. When there's flame impingement on it, because those gusset plates and those engineered truss systems, they fail at something like 350 degrees. Like, you leave your oven open, your roof's going to cave in. But it's the subtle things to where you get complacent, where it's not something glaringly obvious that's going to put you in danger that you have to worry about. You got to reevaluate everything constantly. Like, is this the right way to pick up my coffee cup? Probably, but maybe
Yeah. Right.
Everything needs constant reevaluation in today's world.
Very, very true. So we're wrapping up here. We've hit the hour and a half mark, the hour and 15 mark, which is generally where we like to keep things. I feel like, again, we could talk to you forever, especially based on these notes. Let me ask you, in front of everybody, all our listeners and stuff, do you mind if we post some of the notes that you sent over to us?
I'd like a chance to finish it, because I know it was 6 or 7 pages. That's probably only a third done and half baked. So
wow.
Let me get you a fresh copy.
Okay, so you heard it. Once we get those finalized and everything, we'll send it over to you guys, because I think that they could do. I have done a lot of learning, and again, I was trying to use that a little bit to steer the conversation, but it was so intense and so thorough that it would be difficult to have any type of conversation that was less than several hours based on all the notes that you provided. So we do appreciate that. And for those of you listening, we'll get you those notes on mid-level leadership coming up. Before we close up shop, of course, we have to give a shout out to our sponsor, Beast Mode Baking. Beast Mode Baking aims to bring the highest quality and creative and, of course, delicious baked goods to your home and with nationwide shipping. All orders are pre-ordered in order to be packed fresh and ship them out to you ASAP. Beast Mode Baking offers a flat rate of $15 for shipping due to the size and weight of the cookies and doughs. So we will make sure to send Shannon Knorr some love. That's at SKNORR13 at SNOR13. That is her Instagram handle, where she does a lot of her like businesses and promotions and things of that nature. So you got anything else to add to that before we close up shop?
Yeah, we almost forgot the keynote question.
Oh my
For an
goodness!
interview.
Yes, I almost completely forgot that.
That's okay. I think that's cool, though, that we almost forgot it, because we usually structure that into, that's one of the only things we structure. But this went so fluid and natural, we almost forgot.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the dialogue was pretty natural, and I was thinking more than I was actually prompting myself to ask questions. So you've listened to the majority of our interviews. You know the drill. So you have a head start on some of the people that we've had on. But what does the phrase "chasing dreams" mean to you?
So we're kind of kindred spirits in a lot of ways, and just from I think I've probably about 6 to 10 episodes I went back to listen to you guys, and what chasing dreams means to me is that we're playing an infinite game. There's a lot of infinite game theory out there. And, you can't win life. You can't win bodybuilding. You can't win firefighting. All you can do is be better than you were yesterday, or better than you were last week, because there's going to be times where there's ebb and flow of any improvement. So chasing dreams to me is just heading in the right direction, and if you fall off the path, you get back on it.
I guess that's why they call it chasing dreams and not catching dreams, because you're never.
It's
an
infinite game. You can't win that. You can always just play the game for the sake of playing.
I always look at it as that's why we say fishing. I'm going fishing. I didn't go fished. Because I don't care about the catch so much as it's the chase. It's the thing. It's the act of doing it.
Right.
So, and then the next part of this question is, the last two parts is, do you feel as though you've chased your dreams thus far, and how do you continue to chase your dreams and help others do the same?
I think that I have only recently started to do it, because I don't think I was really a grown-up until about 2 years ago.
Jack.
And you get to a certain point where you actually feel like you are mature enough to realize that that's the world that you're living in and start doing it. So I'm just out there doing what is best for my family and building our family white picket fence type of dream that we're all working on together. And if along the way I'm able to help somebody do the same thing, great. I'm available for it. I'm doing mine, and if I can help you along the way, I certainly will.
And you probably are helping people more than you realize.
Clearly.
Just alluding back to the to the leadership thing, where people are really thankful and appreciative of that. I'm sure.
Right, because I don't hold a title of leadership.
No,
professionally, it's like, hey, you're a solid leader. Oh, cool.
And that's and that goes back to the reason why I wanted to have you on, because so oftentimes titled leaders are entitled. They feel entitled. And I don't know, I'm not referencing anybody in general. I'm just saying in general, a lot of times people that are titled a leader feel like they are entitled to that respect. And a lot of times it's quite the opposite. It's the guys that are just going about their day and happen to have leadership qualities that earn more respect than others.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to cut it. So we will actually probably have to have some further discussion with Jared about this stuff, because it is so convoluted and very complex as we go. But with that, we have come to the end of another episode. This has been the Chasing Dreams Podcast, episode 36. I'm Charlie with Justin and Jared, and we will see you guys next week.